Hello and welcome back guys to yet another one of my Supergirl reviews and the 7th episode of the 3rd season. So this might just be my opinion, but I think this is the best episode of Supergirl so far. And no, I'm not just talking season 3 best, I'm talking best across all 3 seasons. I just think that right now, Supergirl has worked one hell of a recipe for villain development. Now Reign might not be the greatest or the most magnificent villain the Arrowverse has to offer this season, or actually period, but she has been developed in such a way that makes her the most interesting of them all, and raises a lot of questions around her as well. But anyway, and before I continue discussing this episode, let me remind you that your likes and subscriptions would be much appreciated if you end up liking the content of this video. But yes, Reign comes to realize what her origin is, that she is, and I quote, like Supergirl, only she clearly is not. Now the episode starts with all that she's been through since the premiere manifesting into her wanting to find out more about herself and about her limits. So she sticks her hand in boiling water trying to figure out if she would or would not end up hurt, which she doesn't. She then visits her adoptive mother, starts asking questions about herself, her origin, her birth mother, and if she ever displayed any superhuman abilities as a child. Now right there, I did like how we were kind of thrown off as their conversation started. There was her discussion with her mother over how she kicked her out when she was a teenager for insisting on having Ruby. Now that kind of felt like it hinted at Samantha coming to her turning point into Reign over something Ruby related. But instead though, there was the Smallville moment with the shed and the pod that brought Samantha to Earth. That also marked the beginning of Samantha's journey of self-discovery and becoming Reign. At that point though, we've got Samantha believing this is something wonderful, as she cryptically informs Ruby. The saddest thing about all of that though is that her poor daughter is not given enough information to prepare her for what is to come her way. But this is also about the time your sympathy with Samantha starts speaking, because you know she's kind of in for a big surprise. But anyway, Samantha makes it to a place in the middle of the desert, the ground shakes, and her fortress of sanctuary is kind of formed out of nowhere. Now the way it looks on the inside is very similar to Superman's Fortress of Solitude in concept, but very different in the sense that it is rocky, dark, and extremely gritty. Really liked how they worked that one out though, from the way it built itself right out of the ground to the way it looks on the inside. But once again, that is followed by Sam's conversation with, let's call her, the housekeeper of the fortress for now, at least until we get a name. And finally, there it was, the whole transformation into Reign. And we've just got to give it up for the writers, showrunners, and Odette Annabelle for delivering all of that to the audience in that fashion. It all just started with her first impression that she is a hero, that she's like Supergirl, and that belief just got shattered moments later with statements like, they will not call you a hero, they will call you a world killer, they will try to contain your power, but they will fail. You will show no mercy to those who oppose you. Your justice will burn the world of men. But the one that triggered Samantha's biggest fear was your offspring was an unfortunate error. And her fears just kept growing bigger and bigger when she was told that having Ruby delayed her realization of who she really is and of her capabilities, and that it was time for course correction. She was also told that she will soon forget about Ruby, which kinda hints at what's to come. Now the woman I refer to as the housekeeper of the fortress is also the woman from her dreams, or shall I call them nightmares, and she pretty much ends up waking the monster within Samantha, turning her into Reign, in a manner akin to mind control. And the last thing we get to see there is Samantha going, I have awoken. So yes, looking at the entire pattern, we're presented with a villain we're gonna be sympathizing with all the way throughout the rest of the season, and this is most definitely sort of a first for the Arrowverse. Now I could just go through each and every villain we've seen so far on all 4 shows and you would just realize this is a different kind of villain. Samantha is kind of mind-controlled. Something dark within her is being forced into taking control, something she didn't even decide for herself to wake. In the meanwhile, every single major villain on the Arrowverse show so far has had to make the choice for themselves, be good or become the villains they ended up being. Even Slade Wilson, who ended up being redeemable, and whom we like both as a character and a villain, he chose to inject himself with the Mirakuru back on Lianyu. he chose to turn himself into the monster that he became in the end. Add to that as well that Samantha was portrayed as some sort of a very kind person when compared to someone like Slade Wilson, before he went all crazy of course. But anyway, all of that just poses a whole bunch of questions, like 1, what does this mean for Ruby? 2, is Rain ever going to end up going back to being Samantha, or in other words, is she the first redeemable Supergirl villain? And 3, now that we know that she doesn't become Rain over something terrible happening to Ruby, was the whole Alex wanting kids thing some sort of foreshadowing to her possibly adopting Ruby? But all of these questions anyway are ones that will be answered over weeks and episodes to come. So for the time being, all we could do is applaud what I personally believe is the best Supergirl episode yet, and move on to my usual stray comments and Easter eggs. Number 1. The title of the episode, Wake Up, refers to both arcs on this episode and 3 different people. The first is all about Mon-El, whom we now know was the person who woke up from stasis the first time we got to see that ship under the city and those pods. The second is about Imra Ardeen, aka Saturn Girl waking up from her stasis on last night's episode. And the third is all about Rain waking up and Samantha going into metaphorical stasis. Number 2 though, that Martian Manhunter phasing all the way down to the ship. Now that was both a first on Supergirl and very Flash-like, only with a different visual effect. It also felt like a callback to what we watched on The Flash a few episodes back, with Barry phasing downwards and out of Ralph Dibny's office, along with Arias. Number 3 though, Mon-El is back, only now he's totally different. So apparently after leaving Earth in that pod on the season 2 finale, Mon-El ended up going through this wormhole that took him to the 31st century, where he managed to live on Earth. On one hand, and for Kara, it's been 7 months that he's been away, but for him, it's been a whole 7 years. But all of this was part of a bigger explanation of how, number 4, Mon-El is now immune to lead poisoning. So even though the lead that was used to repel the Daxamite invasion of Earth on the second season was still in the atmosphere, Mon-El can no more get poisoned. Thanks to living 1,000 years into the future, a cure has been made available by L-Corp only 400 years in. Now in the comics on the other hand, at some point, Mon-El is put in suspension in the Phantom Zone to avoid his death as a product of lead poisoning. And 1,000 years later, Imra Ardeen, or Saturn Girl, whom I'll be discussing in a moment here, ends up creating a temporary cure for said poisoning, pretty much allowing for his release from the Phantom Zone. Number 5 though, the moment Mon-El states he speaks Saturnian, it was our clue that we're possibly about to get introduced to Saturn Girl. And the moment the name Imra was mentioned as she was broken out of the pod, it was pretty much confirmed. Now so far the narrative here is very similar to the comics. Imra Ardeen in the comics is a 30th century Legion of Superheroes founder, and just like she's introduced here, she descends from Titan, the biggest moon to Saturn's name. Now I am not really sure what set of abilities she's gonna be having on the show, but in the comics she has the abilities of telepathy, mind reading, and mind control. And given how Samantha was turned into Rain on last night's episode, the 3 abilities, especially the third one, sound extremely interesting. It kind of makes a lot of sense that she might play a big role there, especially with Mon-El telling Winn that this is all about saving Kara. But all of that wasn't really the biggest surprise on this episode, considering both the fact that we knew she was coming to Supergirl and the fact that, number 6, after waking up from her coma, she's introduced to Kara by Mon-El as his wife, leading to a whole lot of heartbreak there. The aftermath of said heartbreak is something we're probably gonna be watching on future episodes. I did find it quite interesting though, how in a way that kind of mirrored the situation with Alex on last week's episode. Number 7 though. Now when it comes to the Legion of Superheroes, Mon-El as well happens to be a member. Now so many people have been speculating that Legends of Tomorrow might be about to introduce us to the Time Trapper. As a result, I thought it was worth mentioning here that Mon-El actually ended up dead on the pages of one of the Legion of Superheroes issues after being injured fighting the very same villain. But finally though, number 8. There was this third minor arc on this episode, bringing both John Jones and his father closer in a very human, or shall I call it, Martian moment. It did as well end up revealing that the Martian Manhunter here has been extremely lonely. Now I am not really sure if that kind of arc is meant to lead up to a bigger role for Merle Jones, I guess though this is one more thing we're gonna find more about soon enough. But anyway, that's all on this episode for the time being, and as I mentioned before, I think it was fan-freaking-tastic. So let me know in the comments what you thought of the 7th episode of this season. Let me know as well what your favorite moment or arc on this episode was, and if there are any Easter eggs or details about this episode that I might have missed here. And of course, until I see you next time, thank you all for watching, and have a good one.